DND number 3, Finding Home in Jesus' Name, Chapter 19. Lisa sat slumped at the kitchen table as John and Jody and Chaz worked around her, making coffee, starting breakfast. The sky outside was gray and threatening and completely matched her mood. Without Graham's sunny face at the stove, smiling and humming, Lisa felt completely empty. Jody stopped by her side and sat a cup of coffee in front of her. Here, hon, maybe this will help. Lisa smiled up at her. Thanks. Didn't sleep well? No, I had strange dreams all night and I can't stop thinking about Grams. Well, I'm just happy she's going to be okay, Jody said. Can I get you some breakfast? No, I know you're just being a friend, but you don't have to take care of me. I'll be okay. Chaz came to her and knelt beside her. I wish I could stay with you today, but I really need to take care of the horses and see to fixing the water line that broke again. It's okay. I know you have things that have to be done. I have a million things myself. Dad is going to take the first shift at the hospital, then Shirley, and the contractors are coming by today, and I need to be here. And I'll be turning them over to Jody and John after that. And I told Shirley I'd probably be at the hospital by 5. Maybe I can get free by then and go with you. She smiled briefly. That would be great. Chaz watched her. The small smile she'd graced him with hadn't reached her eyes. He hated to see her so down. Sweetheart, everything's going to be okay. I know. Then why do you look so very sad? She shook her head. I don't know. Something's bothering me, and I can't put my finger on it. It's like nothing makes any sense. He pulled out a chair and sat. Anything in particular? She sighed. This whole business with someone trying to get me to leave, it's ridiculous. It's like something out of a really bad B movie. Well, whoever it is, Lisa, is not in their right mind. To us, it may seem ridiculous, but to him, it probably seems completely logical. Frighten you, and you'll leave. But why? How could my being here possibly be a problem for anyone? It seems surreal. Well, that slice across your arm was real enough. Well, you don't have to tell me that. The scar is right there for all to see. Aw, it's not so bad, and it'll fade with time. She sighed. The scar isn't the problem, Chaz. Yes, he hurt me, but I was willing to go on, you know. I was thinking, so he cut me, so big deal. But now he hurt Jody, and he could have killed Grams. And don't forget Dixie. And think about it, Chaz. If something had happened to Jody that day and their tiny baby, think how I would feel knowing it was because of me. I don't know that I'm willing to take that chance again. Um, Excuse me, John said, placing a plate of food in front of Jody and taking a seat. You have nothing to do with what happens to Jody and me. Well, I certainly do. I had everything to do with what happened on the 4th. You told Jody and I about what was going on here long before we left LA. That was the extent of your responsibility. What we decide to do and the chances we decide to take are up to us, and I'll be darned if you think I'm going to let you take that responsibility. Honestly, Jody and I are intrigued and up for a little adventure. We can handle ourselves. This is not a game, Lisa said. It's life. Oh, I know all about life and death. And in a way, yes, it's a game. Jody and I will take our chances. We are not intimidated. Neither am I, Jody said. Not one tiny bit. Lisa stood, her face red. You stupid people. This is not a game. You could die, she yelled. So, John answered softly. Lisa sat, elbows on the table, leaning her head into her hands. Am I talking to a brick wall? Why can't anybody see? Lisa, Chaz said quietly, I think what John is trying to say is, what is life if we're to be prisoners, penned in by bars or by threats? We have to be free. And life goes on, Lisa, John added. I know of a surety that God exists. I'll have to answer to him one day. I'm going to have to explain what I did with what he gave me, and I do not want him to say that I ran away from evil. Better to say that I confronted it. Life goes on, even after this earthly life. And even if I wasn't speaking of my faith, I could still say that. Scientifically speaking, we are energy. Energy is matter. Matter cannot be destroyed, only changed. If something happens to Jody or me, we will go on. What we will not do is let someone else tell us what we can and can't do with our own lives. Lisa sniffed as tears ran down her cheeks. He tried to kill Grams. Chaz handed her a paper napkin and put his arms around her. He didn't succeed. You can't sit around and think about what might have happened. So what are we going to do? Sit around and see who he tries to pick off next? The police are doing an investigation. Do they have any ideas? Jody asked. Marcus Winstead, Chaz answered. Lisa looked up. What? You think Marcus is behind all this? I do, and so does Tyson. Convincing others has been a bit difficult. He's lived here all his life. Lisa shook her head. I was cut long before Marcus and I had our little encounter. Attempted rape is not a little encounter. Well, he wasn't in his right mind. I can't believe you're defending him. However, you're right about one thing. He was not in his right mind, and neither is the guy who cut you and tried to poison Grams and sent someone to hurt Jody, nor the guy who strung up Dixie or hired a bunch of thugs to jump John and me. And I believe Marcus is behind it all. Lisa sighed slowly, nodding her head. And he did bail out Glenn and out of jail. What is that all about? Jenny told police that earlier that week, Marcus and Glenn spent a couple of evenings getting plastered together. Really? Lisa asked. Yes, really, and Tyson believes Marcus is the one who supplied Glenn with the rofinol. Have they searched his house? John asked. No. Getting a warrant is difficult. The argument is a couple of guys having drinks together is a big leap to one supplied the other with an illegal substance. Home cooking? Oh, absolutely, but I'm not giving up. There's something else about him that's been bothering me. What? John and Lisa asked at the same time. The night you were cut, Lisa. He was here before you were taken to the hospital. He said he saw the lights and came to see what was going on. So? Well, unless he was standing at the very back of his property, he couldn't have seen anything. From his house, even from the lake behind his house, you can't see your property. He wouldn't have been able to see that there was anything going on over here unless, like I said, he was standing at the fence. And why would he be there at 3 o'clock in the morning? So you think it was him? You think Marcus broke into the house and came to my room and held me down and cut me to try to get me to leave town? That is exactly what I think. The knock at the door put the conversation to an end. That'll be the contractor, Lisa said, heaving a sigh. Chaz pulled her to her feet. Are you going to make it? She nodded and smiled. Of course. Please don't worry about me. I'm just a little down. Maybe it's the cloudy day. He put a finger under her chin and kissed her. I'll try to be back before you have to leave for the hospital. I'll look forward to it. New scene. When the second crystal lamp crashed to the floor, Andrea stepped into the office. She watched calmly for a moment as Marcus looked around for something else to throw. Are you quite through? He whirled on her. Shut up. Don't you dare speak to me that way. What in the world is wrong? She survived. Who? Miss Mattie? Yes, of course that's who I'm talking about. Well, good. I'm glad she's alive. Andrea, you don't know what you're saying. I already told you I like Miss Mattie. She's always been nice to us. You shouldn't have tried to hurt her. She's old. She's lonely. I was doing her a favor. I'm sure she misses her husband. I was just hurrying things along. Don't try to sugarcoat it, Marcus. You were being greedy. And now that she didn't die, you must know that it wasn't meant for her to die. Not now. God will tell you when. Frustrated, he ran a hand through his hair. Andrea, it doesn't work like that. How would you know? Does God speak to you? No, he doesn't, but he does speak to me. Is that right? He asked patiently. And what does he say? He's told me that everything will be okay, that Chaz is waiting for the right time for him and me to be together. He told me to be patient. I explained to him that it was very hard to be patient, and he told me that's why he gave me you. You are here to help me and to take care of me, and I, in return, am supposed to take care of you. Anything else? Marcus asked, his voice rising. Did he say what I'm supposed to do once you have Chaz? Did he say who I was supposed to have? Because I've told you, Andrea, you are the only one for me. Just you. There can't be anyone else. Oh, Marcus, why are you so selfish? Haven't I been there for you? Yes, he sighed. Then stop thinking only about yourself. You still haven't done what I've asked of you. Maybe if you show me that you really do love me and do as I ask, then I would stay with you. He didn't answer. He only swallowed hard as she placed her hand on his shoulder. Kill her, Marcus. Get rid of her. You do it, or I will. Soon, I promise. Next scene. By mid-morning, Lisa left the contractors in the hands of Jody and John. She'd been instructed to take a nap. John made her a cup of chamomile tea, and she stood at her window, watching Jody in the backyard speak with the landscape designer, motioning out toward the woods. She didn't really think she could sleep, but she kicked off her shoes and curled up in bed anyway. She thought maybe she would snuggle down in bed and make some calls instead of sleep. She hadn't spoken with Dolly, Bill, and Hank from the diner at the Bakersfield truck stop in weeks, and she really needed to touch base with Megan about the boy she'd broken up with. However, the tea did seem to be doing its job, and she yawned. Perhaps a nap would be for the best. She scooted down under the soft quilt and closed her eyes. New scene. She knew she was dreaming. What was happening was too disjointed to be real. Dixie screeched and jumped on her. Then suddenly she was a much larger cat. She jumped down and ran out of the room. And Marcus was on top of her, his body pinning her to the mattress, telling her it had to be done, the knife sliced deep into the flesh of her arm. And suddenly they were on the ground by the lake, and his body pushed her hard against the cold ground. I'm in love with you, Lisa. You're the one I've been waiting for all my life. She struggled, trying to get him off. He was so much bigger than Glenn, so heavy. Dixie jumped on his back, and he shrieked and tossed her aside, and suddenly Lisa was running, screaming for Chaz to help her, but he didn't come. And she ran until she collapsed against a tree, and the voices came then. She pulled her legs up to her chest and covered her ears. Grams was sick a few weeks before you showed up, Chaz said. Lisa, you make me so hot, Glenn said. I'm sorry, Marcus. I don't know what came over me. I just lost control. Stop crying and act like the professional you're supposed to be, Lou said. I used to have a cat, but he ran away when I was in the hospital just before you came home, Graham said. Be still, or would you like me to hurt the little old lady downstairs? He made a pie. It really didn't taste right. He needs lots of lessons. Just one drink, for old time's sake. Sorry, but this has to be done. Leave and don't come back. What did you do to my brother, you whore? Get a grip, Lisa, and don't call me mother. I'm sorry I lost control. He drugged you. She's been poisoned. The cat never came back. Lisa sat straight up, gasping for air, tears streaming. She stumbled out of bed and into the bathroom and began splashing cold water on her face. Huddled over the sink, she waited until the urge to cry subsided, but it didn't, and finally she gave in to it. Emerging some time later, she sat on the bed and began pulling on her tennis shoes. She needed to get out, go for a walk maybe. She had to get out. As she came downstairs, she could hear voices in the dining room, and she glanced in to see the plans laid out on the giant table. Jody looked up when Lisa poked her head in, and she excused herself for a moment. How was the nap? Jody asked. Lisa shook her head. Bad dreams. Jody frowned. This is the third and last contractor for the day. You want to take some time when he leaves and we'll have girl talk? Lisa smiled. Thanks, but I just need to get some air. I'm going for a walk. Where? Don't worry, just around the house. I just need some time alone to think. I understand. Looks like it may rain, though. It's been looking like that all day. Jody shrugged. You sure you're okay? I'm fine. Go back to your meeting. We'll talk about everything later. Okay. See ya. Lisa slipped out the back door, and turning her face up toward the sky, she could see some splotches of blue. Maybe it wouldn't rain after all. She drew a deep breath and headed out toward the pecan grove. Everything she dreamt kept running through her brain. She needed to think. Just think. For some reason, it seemed like everything was more confusing than ever. Chaz believes Marcus is the one who cut her. There had been something on the edges of her memory that would confirm that. The dream had helped her to remember. The man who cut her had lain on top of her, trying to keep her still, and she knew it wasn't Glenn. This man was much bigger than Glenn, and Marcus had lain on her that night by the lake, and the more she thought about it, the more she believed it had been Marcus both times. But why? What problem could she possibly be to Marcus? If it is him, it isn't because she turned him down. He'd cut her long before he'd taken her out that night. What possible threat could she be to Marcus? She looked up, realizing that she'd passed the pecan grove and headed into the woods. It was quiet here, like she remembered when she'd walked with Chaz, but much darker. She supposed that was due to the cloudy day. She looked up through the trees, but this time could see no patches of blue. Venturing further in, she searched for the big rock she and Chaz had sat on. Her mind kept circling and speculating. If Marcus wanted to get rid of her so much without even knowing her, it had to be that she'd interfered with something he had going before she arrived. But what? She knew he had come over to visit with Grams many times. Grams spoke fondly of him, right up until he tried to rape Lisa by the lake. And even then, Grams had talked to Lisa about forgiveness. She stopped, looking around, but still didn't see the rock. She hadn't thought it was so far into the woods. Perhaps she'd entered at a different point than last time. She hadn't been paying attention and had no idea at which point she'd entered the woods. Probably needed to go off to the right instead of deeper into the woods. So Grams and Marcus had been friends. Grams said Marcus wanted her to teach him to cook, or she said she needed to teach him to cook. She'd said he'd tried to bake her a pie and that it was awful. Lisa stopped, placing her hand over her heart to keep it from racing. It was awful. Grams had said he really needed some lessons. What if it was awful because he'd put something in it? What if this isn't the first time Grams had been poisoned? Chaz said Grams had been in the hospital just a few weeks before Lisa arrived. Was that about the time she tasted Marcus's pie? And didn't Grams say that that's when her cat ran away? Did Marcus kill her cat like he had like he had Dixie? No, obviously not like Dixie, or Grams would have said so, but maybe the cat got into the same pie. Maybe it went away to die. She placed her hand over her stomach as bile rose into her throat. Taking a moment to gather herself, she peered around, realizing she'd never found the big rock that she and Chaz had rested on during their walk. Well, she wasn't lost. She could hear the creek even now. Figuring if she'd make her way down to the creek, she could find the spot she'd visited once before. She turned and headed that way. At the same time, her mind raced over all the possibilities of what Marcus might be capable of and why. Saying for a minute he actually did want to get rid of Grams and her. She still couldn't think of why. Why? Her head was so filled with horror it was becoming difficult to reason. Did he harbor some old grudge? Did Grams discipline him when he'd been just a boy and he vowed he would get revenge someday? The more she thought about it, the more she was convinced that Chaz was absolutely right. It's been Marcus all along. Still, what did he have to do with Glenn? Now there's a puzzle. Tyson believes that Marcus gave Glenn the stuff to put in her drink. Why? Entertainment? She stopped as she emerged at the creek. Immediately her shoes and socks came off and she waded into the cool water. Watching the clear water bubble past her feet, she let her tired mind go. She needed to clear her head. She also needed to talk to Chaz about everything she suspected. A huge drop of water landed beside her, then another, and she looked skyward, realizing she was about to get drenched because the sky was about to open up. She waded out of the water and sat down on the bank to pull on her shoes and socks. She wasn't sure what made her look up. She hadn't heard anything really, just that funny feeling you get at the back of your neck when you feel like someone is watching. Stilling, she listened intently, then turned abruptly at the sound of leaves rustling behind her. Heart pounding, her eyes scanned the forest. Nothing. There was nothing there. Probably just a squirrel, she thought, breathing a sigh of relief. The relief lasted only a second, though, because as she reached toward her sock, she heard a breath drawn. She froze, her heart racing. Slowly, she turned her head first to the right and then left, searching the dark recesses of the woods, but she saw no one. This time, she was sure she wasn't just being paranoid. Someone was watching, nearby. If it was Marcus, this would be his chance to do whatever he wanted. Lightning flashed much closer than she would have desired, and that got her moving. Casting aside the idea of putting on her shoes, she grabbed them up and hurried in the direction of the house. Lightning flashed again, and the thunder exploded, and she moved faster but stopped when she thought she heard footsteps right beside her. Frantically she whirled, but saw no one. Her breath was coming in gasps now. The hairs on her head stood on end. She took off. Lightning flashed all around her, and the sky opened up, and she heard the footsteps again. They were right behind her, but she didn't dare stop. She ran as fast as her legs would carry her, stumbling over sticks and pine cones in her bare feet. A large fallen tree branch sent her sprawling face down. Terrified to look behind her, she scrambled to her feet and took off again. Lost. She was lost. The torrential rain, along with the constant lightning, effectively blinded her, and she had no idea if she was moving toward the house or back toward the creek or sideways. Her heart filled with panic. She forced herself to overcome her fright long enough to stop and try to get her bearings, but searching for some kind of landmark was fruitless. Everything looked alike. She thought she saw a human shadow next to a tree nearby and shrieked as she took off again. A low branch whipped past her face, stinging her, but she didn't slow. She leapt over a stump and fell in a hole and scrambled back up and continued on. Peering ahead, she thought she saw something white and hoped with all her heart that it was the house showing through the trees. She flew as fast as her legs would carry her when suddenly there was a chest in front of her, and she let out a blood-curdling scream. Strong arms came around her. "Lisa, it's me." "Chaz," she sobbed, throwing herself against his chest. "Chaz, there's someone out there." Peering through the trees, he tried to see who may have been following her. He didn't doubt her for a second, but trees were extremely camouflaging, and with the downpour and the wind, he doubted he'd be able to see the person if they didn't want to be seen. "Come on, let's get you in the house." He looked down at her feet. "Where are your shoes?" She sniffed, pushing her tangled wet hair out of her face. "I don't know. I dropped them somewhere between here and the creek." Scooping her up, he started toward the farmhouse. She snuggled up under his chin, steeping herself in the warmth of his body and marveling at his strength and the feel of his hard chest next to her cheek. They walked across an open field in the middle of one of the worst storms Lisa had ever seen, with lightning flashing all around and thunder crashing, and yet never had she felt so safe and so comforted. She peered toward the house as they neared. Home had never looked so inviting. New scene. Lisa smiled down at the sweet woman who had come to mean so much to her. "Dr. Stewart said you're going to be able to come home in a few more days." "I can't wait. What in the world are y'all doing for food?" She laughed. "We're managing. It seems Jody likes to cook." "Hey, I can hold my own," Chaz said from the other side of the bed. "Really? I haven't seen you cook anything," Lisa argued. He shrugged. "Well, as long as someone else is taking care of it, why rock the boat?" Lisa took her grandmother's hand. "Grams, there's something I want to ask you about, if you feel like talking about it. It's about Marcus." "I feel fine, dear. What would you like to know?" "When Marcus was little, did you ever have to discipline him? Like, did he get into your yard or your flowers or something like that, and you had to speak with his parents or maybe speak with him yourself?" Maddie shook her head. "No, never. He only came around every once in a while, usually selling something like raffle tickets, or when he got older, he spoke to Lawrence about buying some life insurance." Chaz and Lisa both stood up straighter. "Did he buy it?" "No, Lawrence already had that covered. He took good care of me. And then Marcus got out of the insurance business and went into real estate, and he did come by a few times after Lawrence passed, asking if I wanted to sell the place. He thought maybe it was too much for me to handle." Chaz glanced at Lisa. "I let him know that it was very sweet for him to be thinking of me, but with Chaz coming around to help me, I was just fine. I'd lived in that house almost my entire married life, and there was no way I was going to leave it." "Of course not," Lisa said, squeezing her hand. "There's something else I wanted to ask, Grams." "Shoot." "You told me once that Marcus wanted to learn to cook. that he brought you something, a pie, I think you said, and that it tasted pretty bad. Oh, yes, it was an apple pie, apple crumb pie, actually. Horrible, very bitter. I'd been meaning to let him know gently that he needed some help in the cooking area, but then he pulled that stunt with you, and I didn't think it would be wise. Lisa nodded. Thanks for that. But, Grams, can you remember when it was he brought you that pie? Oh, sure, I'm not senile yet, she laughed. Let's see. It was just a few weeks before you got here, I believe. Maybe near the 1st of May. Oh, yes. It was just a few days before May 1st, because he said he might take a pie to the May Day celebration at church. Oh, my, I never got back to him about it. I hope he didn't take one to the social. It was just terrible tasting. Do you remember why you never got back to him about it? Lisa asked. Well, yes, I became ill. Chaz knows, she said, patting his hand where he gripped the bed rail. Chaz is the one who took me to the hospital. Lisa looked up at Chaz. You told me Maddie had become ill just before I got here. You said she spent several days in the hospital. Is this the time you were talking about? Yes, Chaz said, shaking his head as he and Lisa realized what's been happening. She had severe nausea and vomiting, and her blood pressure was sky high, and they never did figure out what was wrong. Lisa looked back at Maddie. Grams, has Marcus been to see you lately? Has he brought you anything else to eat or to sample? No, dear, I haven't laid eyes on Marcus. Are you actually thinking he's the one that tried to poison me? If so, that's absurd. Grams, everything points to Marcus being behind everything that's going on. Chaz, do you feel that way too? Grams asked. Chaz nodded. I'm afraid I do, Maddie. But why? Grams asked. Why would he try to hurt me? And me, Lisa added. I think he's the one who broke in that night and the one who killed Dixie. I don't understand why he would do something like that. I think I'm beginning to understand, Chaz said, but before I say anything, I want to speak with Tyson. Lisa eyed him. She won't say anything right now, but no way is he going to think he can keep his theories to himself. She turned her attention back to Maddie. Grams, you got sick right after you ate the pie. What happened to that pie? Do you remember? Brow furrowed, Maddie tried to recall what she'd done with the pie. You know, I can't remember what happened to that pie. The last I recall, it was sitting on my kitchen counter. I don't remember it still being there when I finally got home from the hospital. Lisa nodded. And the cat, Grams. Didn't you tell me the cat disappeared while you were in the hospital? The cat? Henry? Why, yes, I never saw him again. I miss that old Tom cat. Don't you think it's strange that you get home and the cat and the pie are just gone? Well, I do now. I didn't give it a second thought back then, and I'm sure someone was counting on that. Oh dear, Graham said softly. This is just awful. And that is the end of chapter 19.